Welcome to the deep dive. You gave us the sources, we've gone through all the analysis, the research, and the notes, and now we're ready to guide you through a truly fascinating piece of thinking.
Today's mission is deep and, frankly, a little slippery. We're moving into what our sources call a boundary area of thinking.
A boundary area.
Yeah, it's a philosophical space where our regular tools, things like language, classical logic, they just start to malfunction. And yet, the inquiry has to continue.
We are diving into the concept of the non and never-nameable. Our sources are centered on this philosophical dialogue with a character named Hankman, and the analysis connects his extremely radical ideas to everything from ancient Eastern thought to complex modern linguistic theory.
It's an exercise in humility, really. The goal isn't to give you a definitive answer because by its very definition, that's impossible.
Right.
The goal is to understand why certain things resist being defined and, what the structure of reality might look like beyond the limits of our concepts.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with Hangman's opening move, which is just pure provocation. He immediately dismisses the most fundamental distinction we use every single day.
The difference between existence and non-existence.
Exactly. He calls it a simplistic distinction.
And that's fascinating, right? Because he's rejecting the very foundation of how we order reality. The study of being ontology, it all built on that binary.
Sure.
Is the sky blue? Is your phone in your pocket? We rely on existence being a definitive, practical yes or no.
Right. If I'm looking for my keys, it's decisive. They either exist right now under this couch cushion, or they are non-existent in this room. That distinction is how we navigate the world. So why does Hankman think that's simplistic?
Because that binary, as useful as it is, it only applies to nameable things, things we can conceptually capture.
Okay.
Hankman argues that the non and never-nameable belongs to a completely different category. It is not simply a thing we haven't found yet or a thing that is currently absent.
So he's not just inventing some complicated name for potential. He's saying we actually need a new file drawer in our mental cabinet.
Exactly. And this leads right to the core paradox. When the other person in the dialogue pushes him and asks, does the non and never-nameable exist? Hankman gives the predictable answer.
Which is?
Of course my non and never-nameable does not exist. But that's only half the story. If he stopped there, it would just fall into the bin with our lost socks and, fictional dragons.
But he doesn't stop. He clarifies that it also does not exist, since it is there, just not as a something. Now, for you listening, that sounds like a clever semantic trick. Why is this category truly separate from just non-existence?
The key is in that very specific phrase, just not as a something. Non-existence usually implies something was there and is now gone, or something could be there but isn't.
Like the concept of potential existence.
Right. And Hankman explicitly rejects that. He insists it's a structural remainder of reality.
A structural remainder. That's a powerful idea.
Think of it like this. Imagine a sheet of paper that represents all possible conceptual, nameable things. Existence and non-existence, they live on that sheet. The non-nameable isn't a blank spot on the paper.
It's the space around the paper.
It's the space around the paper, the boundary itself. You can point toward the edge, it's there, but you can't draw a conceptual map of it because it's the very condition for the map.
That makes the concept much more palpable. So it's real enough to be encountered, but it resists being defined as an object. And if it resists definition, well, that leads us directly into the linguistic trap. How do you even begin to talk about something that refuses to be categorized?
That is the ultimate hurdle. Our sources point out that naming is more than just describing something. It's an act of conceptual control.
Control?
Yeah. When you name something table, gravity, justice, you force it into a stable conceptual framework. It gives you this intellectual mastery over it. But the non-nameable resists that control because it has no fixed form to capture.
So since direct naming is totally off the table, Hankman is forced to use the only tool he has, language itself, but indirectly. He has to rely on what the sources call circumscription.
Exactly. Instead of hitting the target, you have to talk around the target. Imagine trying to describe the shape of something hidden inside a thick velvet bag just by pressing on the fabric. You use many words, many different angles to sort of delineate the boundaries of the concept without ever actually naming the concept itself.
But here is the massive potential for confusion. And this is crucial for understanding why these philosophical arguments just never end.
Right.
If both the nameable object, say a coffee cup, and the non-nameable structural remainder are described using words.
And our brains can't help but treat them similarly.
Right.
Precisely. If I use 2 words to describe the coffee cup and 40 words to describe this boundary concept, my subconscious filing system just says, okay, these are both word concepts. They must both belong to the non-existence binary. The dialogue warns there's plenty of potential for the greatest possible confusion.
So the illusion is that the non-nameable is just a hard-to-name thing, when in fact it's a fundamentally non-nameable thing. People spend ages arguing because they are miscategorizing the problem before the argument even begins.
That's the core of it. Hankman's key observation is that if people are still discussing this for ages, it's because the very system they are trying to fit the concept into our classical logic is the source of the problem.
And that takes us to our next section, where we connect Hankman's rejection of the binary to centuries of philosophical history. He's not some outlier. He's taken up an old torch.
Absolutely. Hankman's radical rejection of existence is a direct challenge to the very basis of Western thought, which is, of course, Aristotelian logic. The crucial principle here is the law of the excluded middle.
Okay, walk us through the excluded middle. For someone listening, that sounds overly technical, but it's actually foundational to how we think every day.
It's simple, really. Everything is either A or not A. It's true or false, on or off. If you're building a shelf, the board is either 6 feet long or it is not 6 feet long.
There's no third option.
There is no third option where it is simultaneously both. This system is incredibly efficient for ordering the physical world.
But the moment you enter that boundary area of thinking, the excluded middle fails.
Exactly. Hankman is suggesting that reality includes a third category, a place where the logic of A or not A simply does not apply. And historically, thinkers have always looked for this third way.
The sources cite some great parallels. I was fascinated by the connection to mystical theology, for instance.
Oh yeah, think of Meister Eckhart. When he was discussing the nature of the divine, he couldn't use positive descriptors because any human term would just diminish or limit the concept of God.
So what did he do?
He relied on negation. He would say things like, God is neither this nor that. It's circumscription applied to the ultimate mystery.
And that same resistance to categorical terms shows up in Eastern philosophy, with the Buddhist concept of ishyata.
Often translated as emptiness or void. And shunyata is perhaps the closest parallel to Hankman's concept. It is not nihilism. It's not nothing. It's the emptiness of inherent existence, a radical non-categorization. It can't be called existing, non-existing, both, or neither.
It's the ultimate conceptual safeguard.
A safeguard against confusing the map our language with the territory, which is reality.
The territory resists the map. This raises a crucial point about language philosophy, because there's a famous figure who looked at the limits of language and came to the exact opposite conclusion from Hankman.
You're talking about Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Yes, who concluded his seminal work, the Tractatus, with that incredibly famous line.
Wovon man nicht sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. When language hits its limit, you stop.
But Hankman doesn't retreat into silence. He leans right into the boundary and uses language to talk around the silence. Why does he choose this active circumscription over Wittgenstein's philosophical silence?
Well, because the silence, while it's philosophically consistent, it means you abandon the task of even pointing out that the boundary exists. Hankman's circumscription is a teaching method. By trying to define what cannot be defined, he is actively demonstrating the limits of our concepts, which is the whole point. He is using the word the significant to show its inability to capture the full meaning of reality, the significat.
So his goal isn't definition, his goal is demonstration. Naming is an operation that attempts to force reality into a conceptual box, but Hankman is constantly exposing the things that spill out of that box.
Exactly. When we name something, we feel we control it intellectually. The non and never-nameable is Hankman's way of forcing us to look at what resists that control.
Okay, that clarifies the philosophical structure and the historical context perfectly.
Yeah.
Now we come to the final movement of the dialogue, which is profoundly human and kind of brings us back down to earth. What is the practical takeaway of dealing with all this conceptual discomfort?
The dialogue itself is structured as this light, non-didactic exchange. It uses humor and narrative to deliver these deep insights. He's the narrative philosopher who might look like a clown, but is delivering profound truth.
But his interlocutor eventually just hits a wall.
Yeah.
They can no longer sustain the conceptual gymnastics required to talk around the non-nameable without, collapsing it back into a simplistic binary.
Yes.
And the interlocutor finally surrenders, saying, please never talk to me about this topic again.
And that reaction is key. That surrender demonstrates the toll this kind of deep thinking takes. It's frustrating because the human mind desperately craves conceptual stability and closure.
Yeah, we want an answer.
We want an answer. And when you deny it that closure, when you insist on a category that is neither A nor not A, it causes genuine cognitive discomfort.
And Hankman's final reply is the ultimate mic drop, and maybe the greatest lesson about knowledge that resists language. He replies, "What do you think is the reason I only talk about such topics with myself?"
That line, it just reinforces the sheer difficulty of communication. If this insight can only be approached through indirect language and complex conceptual shifts, it resists being easily shared.
It's personal.
It implies that the most profound insights are often intensely personal and non-transferable. You can only guide someone to the boundary. They have to do the circumscription work themselves.
This changes the entire purpose of this deep dive, then. We didn't try to solve the paradox because Hankman showed us it's structurally unsolvable. Instead, we clarified why the question exists and persists.
Yes, the philosophical consequence here is crucial. Reality is not exhaustively nameable, and our logical systems, while practical, are not comprehensive. The ultimate knowledge we gain from this dialogue is what the analysis calls epistemic humility.
Epistemic humility, knowing the limits of what you can know.
Absolutely. Recognizing that there are aspects of reality that are demonstrably there but defy our current intellectual tools, that is itself a powerful form of knowledge. It frees you from the endless circular debate that arises from just misapplying the existence-non-existence binary.
So the significance is really illuminating the structural confusion. The problem isn't a lack of cleverness or a lack of vocabulary. It's a fundamental mismatch between our linguistic architecture and the boundless nature of existence.
That's the shift. Instead of continuing the futile search for an answer to the non-nameable, we gain a deeper insight into the mechanism of the paradox itself.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought to carry forward, directly inspired by Hankman's rejection of that existence in binary. If that is a simplistic distinction, what other binary categories are you constantly relying on in your daily life or maybe in your professional field that are equally simplistic when truly examined?
Think about the easy dichotomies we live by. Success versus failure, right versus wrong, objective versus subjective. Are these truly absolute binaries? Or are they just highly practical shortcuts that, when you push them to their boundary, also contain a structural remainder, a non and never-nameable category that defies the excluded middle?
What excluded middles are we ignoring just because it makes us uncomfortable? That's definitely something worth pondering on your own.
Indeed. Until next time on The Deep Dive.